Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with one other person. This week I am joined by Mike Cooper. Mike is a subsurface and exploration manager. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Michelle, thanks for asking me to come onto your podcast. Yeah, Mike Cooper. I've spent my entire career working in the energy sector, mainly oil and gas, and initially as a geologist, but latterly as a sort of a manager. I was promoted to various levels of incompetence in various companies. And then in more recent times, I've been involved in actually getting 3 companies, starting them, and in the case of 2 of them, actually seeing them from cradle to death, whatever it's called. So basically, those 2 companies were wound up, liquidated. So had some experience, an oil company, a consultancy company, and I've got another company going on. And then the other thing I'm known for, more so these days, I have a YouTube channel and I think over 290 videos now out there, and quite a good following of people who are interested in the sort of the stuff. More than an influencer, I like to think an educator. So try and tell people about different aspects of oil and gas.
So how did you get started off in the energy sector?
So I think at school I enjoyed and quite good at the sciences. I think my father was always interested in geology and would always point out, glacial valleys and corries and all sorts of things. And I always found it very, very interesting. And then I kind of, like geography as well. And I studied geology at university, and was quite keen to go into the oil and gas sector. There were lots of jobs at the time. The North Sea was really kind of kicking off. It was the 1980s was a great time for oil and gas exploration and production, for that matter. So that's why I started in the industry.
Do you see a lot of changes in the energy sector?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think how the business was then compared with how it is now, it's become very, very technical. In fact, there is generally less activity, not just here, where we live in Scotland, but globally, in fact. We've seen that the number of drilling rigs operating is declining. The amount of reserves that have been found in any year is declining. In fact, I was recording a video today, actually, which was featuring some of these graphs, and that'll be out shortly on my channel, the Trove News, as it's called.
Okay, so how do you think a young professional or young graduate's career will look like in the energy sector going forward?
So I took on a couple of young graduates. Well, they're not quite so young now. It's probably half a dozen, 6, 7 years ago. They, I think, were going to struggle to find a career in the energy sector in oil and gas. They've both done very, very well, tremendous. It's quite humbling and also very, very rewarding to work with young folk. But I think it's got even worse for people coming out of industries now. I mean, far fewer universities are having anything to do with the oil and gas industry. The funding has dried up, and the number of courses being offered, they've moved across more onto the environmental side and into the net zero energy transition sort of, which is interesting, but it's quite challenging, I think, as well. So there aren't the same jobs and aren't the same opportunities as there was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Do you think that because the universities are maybe not providing courses tailored to the oil and gas industry, that's going to affect a shortage of skills worldwide?
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. I mean, everybody wants to see us challenging climate change, but I think we need to kind of look back at the geological record to see, just what has been happening on the Earth's history. And we've had very, very extreme conditions at many, many times in the geological record. And even a case that or an example I always like to quote is that 10,000 years ago, which geologically is yesterday, it's a very short period of time, but we could have walked across from England across to France. So you could have walked from London to Paris. You wouldn't have got your feet wet. So there's been a huge amount of change that has been going on there.
Okay, but do you think that you were touched on the fact before that you didn't think that the younger generation, young professionals, graduates, you didn't think they would be able to have a career in the energy sector? Or do you see that more in the renewables or net zero?
There is certainly some aspects of the renewables industry. We cover offshore wind, geothermal, carbon capture. When I say we cover it, we have information on every single project worldwide, in our Trove database, and we keep maintaining that and adding to it. So we have quite a good knowledge of what is going on and what's being developed. Yes, there are some jobs in all those sectors, but they're only a part. They will only ever be a part of the solution. There is still going to be a residual need for oil and gas, and I think a lot of the universities kind of turned their backs on oil and gas, and some of them said, "Well, we're not going to accept any funding from oil and gas companies." And I think they'll probably look back and think that was a little bit knee jerk. We are going to rely on fossil fuels for decades and decades to come.
Do you really believe that? Because a lot of people don't.
I absolutely do, yeah. And if you look at the data, that's what drives me. I mean, look at the data and look at the projections. We're still going to be reliant, probably fossil fuels are going to be delivering more than 50% of global energy supply by 2050 and beyond.
Okay. But do you think that we'll ever be able to get rid of the oil and gas?
I think we've come a long way. We've actually cleaned up how we produce it. There's been less emissions, avoiding spillages. I think the oil and gas sector has become very responsible. In fact, it always was, but I think definitely there's been a step change and improvement. I think there's an improvement in efficiencies for how we use fossil fuels. And that will continue. And there is the opportunity, hopefully, to actually capture some of those emissions. And it may be that carbon capture does become a viable industry, but I think right now it's still economically challenged.
So how do you think that a young professional's career would look like in the future?
There should be jobs, for all sorts of geoscientists, engineers, chemical engineers in all sorts of sectors to do with oil and gas. There'll be nuclear. There will be jobs in renewables, but possibly we are seeing a number of changes going on. The AI is in its infancy. Where is that going to go? What's that going to be? What impact is that going to have on jobs? It's certainly going to mean, a lot of jobs will not require as much human intervention. When I started out in this industry, Michelle, I remember I worked for BP and we used to have a typing pool where you would take your handwritten reports and take them along, and a secretary, very often a housewife, that was just the way of it, would type these things up. And of course, if there was a few errors, out would come this white paper, this Tipex, I think it was the brand. And if there were too many errors, the whole thing would have to be retyped. Well, I look back at that now and it seems something from the Victorian era. We have progressed so much just in the course of my career.
Do you think that AI will have a big impact on jobs in the energy sector going forward?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you want a legal agreement, you can actually just ask ChatGPT to write one for you. And, all of a sudden, yes, you still need a lawyer to give it, scrutinize it and make sure it's got all the clauses in and all the protection that's required. But my goodness me, a lot of groundwork can be done. But then there are some areas, for example, the interpretation of something as complex as the subsurface, where when I try AI and ask it questions, it gets very, very kind of, I'll say confused, but it's not a thinking thing. It's just it's artificial intelligence. It's not human intelligence.
Going back to your career, what is your biggest achievement in your career?
I had a number of achievements in developing oil fields, developing concepts for exploring blocks. But in some ways, what's happened in the last decade or so, when I've actually been sort of starting up companies and working very, very closely with small teams of people, and in some cases, young people, that's been the most rewarding by a long way. And success, well, some of the companies have not been as successful as was hoped, but in some ways, the learnings and yeah, it has been a great experience. It feels like a success. May not have generated a huge financial return, but you've got to try it, and that's something that I would say to graduates or young people coming in is that, if you actually get a grounding and a basic understanding in an area, then, don't be afraid to just find a niche that you enjoy doing and try and make your own business and grow it that way. I think there's going to be lots of scope for specialist industries in the future.
How do you mean by specialist industries?
Well, you have a niche, an area of understanding that I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but some aspect of engineering, and become recognized as an expert in the field, producing, using innovation and also working with others and developing a new product, a new service. Just there's all sorts that can be done. I mean, or go and become a plumber because, the world will always need plumbers.
Yeah, that is true, actually. That is very true.
And AI will never solve that one.
Do you think that AI will eventually take over from engineers and things like that?
I think it can to a degree. It can write procedures. It's got the ability to look at technical drawings and these plans and just kind of work out, does it make sense? Is the flow path right? But it's already that you're doing that with your computerized systems, so you're just seeing that everything kind of makes sense. But I would still want to see a properly trained engineer just putting their eye over it, just sense checking that everything does make sense. I saw an AI presentation that somebody had put together a presentation. It had obviously used AI because whilst most of it, 99% of it, looked absolutely fine and very, very impressive, the presentation was excellent, but there was one glaring error that just stood out to me, that instantly you see it. And it said, this oil discovery in Namibia was in this basin, and it wasn't. It was in another basin. But that's where you need to have a human, an expert, look over it and just say, no, this needs to be changed. And why AI got that wrong, I don't know. It's early days. Maybe that's all going to improve.
Okay, but can you really tell if AI has generated something?
I think so, yeah. You can see it on. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I see a lot of videos that are obviously generated by AI. Because again, it's 99%. It makes sense, and then all of a sudden, it makes a comment, or it mispronounces something, or it refers to a date, and refers to it as 2026 as opposed to 2026 or whatever. It makes some error that you just all of a sudden you go, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem right. And very often, I've done searches where, I've asked about an oil field in West Africa, and there's another oil field with the same name, say, in the North Sea, and it's mashed together, the two bits of information. So you can see, yeah, it's kind of got that piece right, and it's also that those bits are right. But when you put them together, it's a melange. It's a right mess, And yeah, I do. I think you can tell, and I think I'm getting better at spotting it. And normally, I will just dismiss things that so obviously. There are channels, entire channels on YouTube that it's just AI generated material. And you can watch it and you're taken in by it for quite some time. And then you realize it's complete rubbish.
You think so?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's dangerous because, in the midst of it, trying to do its best and does a very, very good job. But then all of a sudden there's misinformation. There's, Mr. Trump would call it fake news. And I see that all too often.
Okay, so what is the, say if a young professional was wanting to start up their own YouTube channel, what would your advice be to them?
Take lots and lots of photographs of kittens running around. No. There are so many. There are so many people who are successful with some great innovation and some great ideas, and come up with some fantastic channels. And yeah, indeed, some of them do make a good living out of it. Some of them, make a lot of money out of it. Personally, because the YouTube channel I have is very niche. It's about predominantly the sort of the geology and the subsurface aspects of oil and gas. Plus, we do some renewables stuff on wind and geothermal, CCUS, and stuff like that. But primarily oil and gas. It's a very niche area. We're never going to get the hundreds of thousands of followers, and nor are we looking for that. What we're looking for is I hear people come back, young people, and they feed back that, oh, I was going for an interview with company XYZ, and that they were operating in one of the areas that we do regular videos on, and they watched all of the videos and went to the interview armed with that information and knowledge and understanding, which I think is fantastic. It's great, whether it be Namibia, Guyana, Brazil. I mean, we do videos of all over the world: China, India, Russia. I mean, we cover the globe.
Okay. Does the different locations in different countries, do they carry out how they produce oil and gas differently to the UK?
Yes, no. I mean, the geology can often be similar. So, for example, you would actually talk about Atlantic geology. So the North Sea is similar to the West of Shetlands, is similar to offshore Newfoundland, and then we can even go on down to West Africa, across to Brazil, South America, and there are a lot of similarities, different timings and breakups for the Atlantic, South and North Atlantic, etc. But there are also, it's the differences that matter. And every single oil field and gas field, every single discovery is different. There is something about it. So you have to gather the information, gather the data, and then do the analysis before you can really understand what it is you have.
Okay, so do you think a geologist will have a very different job in the years to come then?
Well, I have seen a lot of it becoming, these computerized models that we have thousands upon thousands of cells, and, you can fly through your reservoirs. And I think, the amount that one geologist can do today is what it would take probably five geologists to get through even 30 years ago. The computerization and the automation of so many different systems, it means that a lot more can be done. But I think there's an awful lot of learnings that have to go on, the sort of the rule of thumb, the sort of having a look at it pragmatically, and having a look and does this make sense? there is, again, we do suffer from being overloaded with misinformation all the time. And the internet, whilst it's the best thing that has ever happened to humanity in some ways, it's also a curse because there is so much information that nobody can look at everything. What we've done for decades now is collated information, put it into sort of databases where you can then just go in and find analogs, you can find information on any oil field, gas field in the world, and you can compare it and you can learn, understand what your competitors are doing. You know all about your own oil fields. Well, what's happening to the one next door? What's happening to the one in the next basin, the next country? That's where I think, well, it's called experience, isn't it? And I mean, we're trying to actually capture experience and put it somewhere where people can readily access that and really understand what's happened over the 150 plus years of the development of the oil and gas industry and other industries as well.
Okay. But then, do you really think that competitors would look up at each other's? I mean, they probably would actually. Would
Well, they
each
should
other's
do.
data?
They should do because, it might be that your competitor has got an advantage. I mean, take the example of the Permian Basin. I mean, I did a video on that very recently and it's been very well received. I mean, it's just an overview. It's simple, but it's also very complex. Over there, they'd had all the conventional oil and gas fields. They produced them for 150 years. They were all in very, very late life. They had the stripper wells doing, just a few barrels a day, the pump jacks or the nodding donkeys, as we call it, all over, and so many of them going in. And then along comes some companies with ideas about fracking, hydraulic fracking, multi-stage hydraulic fracking. And this technology added to horizontal drilling, to 3D seismic and all the advances that there have been. And then all of a sudden, the US, after years and years and years of declining production, all of a sudden it's the most prolific producer on the planet and continues to be so, doing some 13 million barrels of oil a day, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia.
Okay.
That's a success. And to be honest with you, could that model be transferred? Well, yes, it can. I mean, the Vaca Muerta down in Argentina is perhaps the second best example of unconventional fracking. Could it be done in the UK? Absolutely. But of course, public opinion turned against it on the back of one or two earth tremors in the Blackpool area, and then politicians came on board, and I think the public got sort of sold. They were frightened that something was going to go badly wrong.
Yeah, because I do remember that I think the UK were starting to do fracking, but then it all of a sudden stopped.
It did, and that was one of the companies that I had started. Was looking to develop some unconventional oil fields in North England. It was over on the East Coast, and the potential is still there. There's many basins where this could be tried, but the reality is that right now the public are fearful that all sorts will happen, and I think it's as if the oil and gas industry hasn't even attempted to take on that particular area and try and change people's minds. If done well, if done properly, it is not a problem. And of course, as for fracking, well, we do it on a regular basis offshore in the North Sea. Every day of the year, we're fracking somewhere, and it's not a problem. If it's done well, if it's done badly, it can be an issue. It has to be regulated, it has to be monitored. But oil and gas companies, they're very responsible organizations, and they'll make sure that it is done properly.
Okay. So do you really see a future in the fracking then?
Yes, I mean, look at the US. I mean, the United States is the world's leading economy, primarily down to fracking. The amount of revenue that they are generating with 13 million barrels of oil being produced a day. I mean, those numbers are they're eye-watering. Yeah, that's the future. It is a great potential resource that a lot of countries have turned the back on. I think there's a lot to be learned. Go and have a look at the video on the Permian Basin and just see what's happened there. It is quite. There are issues. There are some issues. There are some environmental impacts that are not desirable. But again, that's perhaps because things haven't been done as well as they should have been in the past. Wells that have been left, these legacy wells, these orphaned wells. They have something in the States called zombie wells, where they weren't abandoned correctly, and because you now are pumping some of this water back into the ground, pressurizes the reservoirs, and some wells that weren't abandoned properly come back to life, and so you get these wells spurting out water, and of course they then have to be worked over. They have to, well, not worked over. They have to be abandoned properly. So yeah, there are challenges, but again, there is mitigation in place, and you've got somebody like the Railroad Commission in Texas, who's the regulator for it. They've got a huge teams of people and an immense program to go and get after what is legacy issues. But then every industry's, there's legacy issues associated with coal mining in the UK, with slate mining in the UK. With that's just every time you make an omelette, you break eggs. It's and sometimes, in the past, we didn't really understand what damage we were doing to the environment. You may know that the Bings in the Midland Valley of Scotland, between Edinburgh and Glasgow, once considered a complete eyesore. They were the spoils from the oil shale industry when we used to mine oil shale in the Lothian region of Scotland. And then there was this huge, great spoil waste tips. Now they've got preservation orders on them, and people love their Bings. They don't want to see them moved or changed in any way. Times change.
Do you think that no matter what type of energy we're going to be using going forward, it's still going to have some sort of impact on the environment?
Absolutely. Everything, whether it's offshore wind, solar, they do have an impact. The trying to recycle the turbine blades, just these, there's going to be so much landfill with these things. But there are documented cases, and I'm not going to go through those arguments of what's good and bad. But what we have ended up with is in the UK, we have the most expensive energy for industry of any industrialized country on the planet. So for that reason, industry can't compete in the UK with most places. In the US, energy is costing industry about a quarter or a fifth of what it does in the UK. So our ludicrous energy policy that is suicidal, that has been introduced, it is affecting the young graduates coming out of college today, and they're going to have to deal with this legacy. And it's not going away overnight. These problems are going to be around for a long, long time. Fixed wind makes complete sense. Floating wind, lots and lots of issues. Very, very expensive. That's not going to change.
You don't think it'll change now?
It can't. From an engineering point of view, I mean, you're trying to tether something to the seabed, and it's being, blown about by wind and waves and tides, and the constant wear and tear on these things, and then trying to get that power to shore, and then put all the pylons in place, which are going to cover the countryside. Proposing to take it from the far-flung corners of Scotland to get it down to the central belt and down into England, and to supply where the demand is. Yeah, it's going to have a huge environmental impact. And it's going to cost a fortune.
Do you think it'll cost more?
It already is. I mean, you just have to look at your energy bills and see how much you're paying for your gas. Compare it with what you're paying for your electricity.
Do you think that electricity prices will go up then?
In time, they will, yeah. I mean, just on 14th of January this year, the AR7, I think it was called, it was the latest round of wind farm allocations. Well, you look at that, the prices, the contract for difference prices are the highest that they've ever been. They're normalized back to 2004 level when they present this stuff. But what it's saying is yes, it's more expensive. And floating wind is even more expensive than fixed wind. So that's fine. And I see solar farms cropping up on farmers' fields are being turned into these massive, great solar farms. Well, would the land be better used to sort out the sort of food shortages that we have globally and the inequalities that we have in the world? There we go.
Yeah,
For the young people coming out of universities.
yeah, I know. That leads me on to next question. What would your advice be to any new graduates coming out of the university looking for a career in energy?
Get into the work environment, even if that means doing any job that's working for no money. I know that sounds terrible and it breaks my heart, but when I took on a couple of graduates who then, stayed with me, one of them still with me 7 years later, and one just left last year, two great guys. They were initially, when they came on board, I said, well, I'm not sure how much I can pay you. It won't be very much. And I don't know for how long I can continue to pay you, but they kind of understood, recognized that what the risk was. Well, it worked out. It worked out for them. And now they are highly employable, very, very talented individuals and very knowledgeable about lots and lots of areas of energy. So just get in somewhere, just start doing something. And some of the larger corporations, they do have these some programs, some opportunities, but even just working in a small firm and just really starting to get to understand how business works, how different it is to academia, how different it is to the classroom, and really just start learning new skills, getting experience and knowledge.
Okay. Do you think, because a lot of the younger, yeah, a lot of younger people might not want to work for free or something. Is that really going to be how it's going to be in the future?
I think it's how it is already. I mean, I'm only, yeah, fantastic. In the ideal world, there would be jobs for everybody, and everybody would walk into a great position. And there are some opportunities, lots of opportunities in different sectors, and certainly in the sort of the IT and the whole AI area, there's certainly growth potential in there, but some of the manufacturing is really struggling, has been struggling for decades in the UK and other Western European. A lot of manufacturers moved to Asia. We know that. We've become sort of mainly a service economy. We can specialize. We can't make bulk steel, but we can actually make specialist steel, for example. And that's the areas, those little niches where if we are good at something, and it does take skill and it takes apprenticeships and time to learn, they're the areas where, what is it? A nation full of shopkeepers or something? Is that what was said of the UK at one stage?
Yeah. Do you think that do you think the industry will ever go back to how it was in the 80s where there was the boom and loads of jobs for everybody?
No.
Not even with the new technology coming in, the new industries, the renewables and wind and
I mean, we have surrendered so much of our heavy industry to countries like China, India, Korea, wherever it might be. And as I said, we're now looking at the fact that energy, the cost of energy in the UK is the highest on the globe. It is so high that you can't, that's one of the foundations of building a manufacturing industry is having access to cheap energy. We don't have it, and we won't have it for years and years to come because of the decisions that have been made, essentially, not supporting and closing down the oil and gas sector. Yes, money's been thrown into to solar, wind. I mean, we're putting billions, tens of billions into CCUS projects, and we'll see where that goes. But right now, industry, the investors are not coming from the private sector. It's government money. And of course, when I say government money, I mean our money. We're taxpayers. It's our money that's going into to actually funding these things. And it may be that what you have to do to start an industry, but the UK takes this position that if we show the world how to be very, very green and clean, they will follow because we'll be setting a great example to the world. Well, even if we got our carbon emissions down to zero, it would only make it 1%. I think 1.3% is the carbon emissions of the UK. So if we're going to sacrifice our economy and sacrifice our way of life, our future, the future for jobs, for the next generation, just to set an example to the world, we know how many countries have said, we're not doing this, and USA, Russia, China. China's doing a lot. I mean, they're always talked about as they have a coal-fired power station opening every other week. Well, I mean, it will become the world's biggest economy. It's doing all the manufacturing for much of the rest of the world. So they need to keep growing and building and expanding, but. That they're leading the way. The amount of wind turbines that they're making, the technology they have for solar is world leading. They do things at such scale, economies of scale. It's going to be very difficult for anybody to compete unless something like the US is sort of saying, well, with tariffs, we can actually make it where. Perhaps we can make America great again is of course one of the things that we hear on the TV all the time. So yeah, that's it will take a lot of political will to actually affect change. And right now, the UK's embarked on this path of which has resulted in us having very, very expensive energy, and that's not conducive to having any sort of manufacturing industry in the foreseeable future.
Okay, but then you were saying that if the UK got down to its net zero, that maybe other countries might follow suit. Do you think that they would?
Well, they'll probably look at us and say, well, yeah, well done. You got to you got to net zero carbon emissions. But at what cost? And do we want to actually take that cost where, we lose so many jobs, we lose so much industry. We're not competitive on the world stage because, we've priced ourselves out by our energy policies. I don't think they would. I mean, they'd be stupid to.
Do you think so?
I think when you see, a lot of countries, again, they came out and they put bans on fracking, they put bans on oil and gas exploration, on licensing rounds. Look at the number who've backed off and changed on that stance now, and they've reopened. They've said, but, industry, we talk about, sort of some states where they are fickle, they have very changing fiscal environments, that, we refer to third world countries and maybe they're not quite as stable. They're not a blue chip country, well, one of the worst countries on the planet for changing its treatment of the energy sector and oil and gas in particular. I mean, what 78% is the windfall tax on oil and gas companies at the minute. Probably about what 25% tax for oil companies in the US. Mm-hmm. Why would a UK company want to stay paying that a level of tax? BP and Shell, why do they stay here? There's a controversial idea. They would be a lot more successful if they were headquartered in the US, and if they turned their back on this country, the effect on our economy would be devastating. So stop driving people away, stop driving industry, start encouraging. Labor are supposed to be about growth, aren't they? Aren't they?
I don't know. Are Yes, okay. Right, I'm going to finish there. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Mike for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.